Hey everybody, Tim here with today's review of James Bond. We have the fourth movie, Goldfinger. So this movie came out in 1964, and if you count the original Climax TV show movie, Casino Royale, this would be like the 10th anniversary of that movie coming out. So that's kind of cool. So overall, this is the third movie as far as the Eon Productions, and I gotta say, this was actually probably my favorite movie so far out of the three. Like, From Russia with Love was a little bit of a dip for me. Dr. No was okay. This movie was really good. I really enjoyed the whole, first half of the movie. The second half, had a little, it wasn't as engaging, at least for me, but then, the climax of the movie was super interesting, and I really enjoyed it. So this movie has no mention of Spectre, which both Dr. No and From Russia with Love both mentioned it. So this is the first one where Goldfinger is just kind of his own agent. I mentioned in my last review how in From Russia with Love, the actual James Bond did not show up for 20 minutes of the movie, whereas in this one, he starts instantly. He's in the movie, the very first scene. And it's kind of funny because he's swimming and he's in a diver suit with a little fake duck on him. And then he gets out, he does his thing, and then he rips the diving suit off, and he's just in this white tux, which is something we see over and over again in action movies today, and this is kind of the start of that, cliche, so it's kind of interesting. And a lot of this movie is, so I've mentioned in TV show reviews, if you guys have seen my Star Trek and stuff like that, the first season of a TV show is usually pretty bad. It's not that great. For The Next Generation, for Star Trek, for example, the third season is about the best. The first two are really rough. That's kind of how I felt with this movie. Whereas the first two, they weren't bad necessarily, but they were a little bit rough. And this is the movie where we get all of the cliche stuff that we really know James Bond for. It comes from this movie. We saw glimpses of it in the past. In the first movie, we see him get a martini that was shaken, not stirred, but he didn't order it. In this one, he does. In the second movie, we had Q, but it wasn't the Q that we know and love. He just kind of came in, was here's your briefcase, and then left, whereas this is that Q. So, and I'll kind of get to some more of the stuff a little bit later on. Some more of the fun scenes that again we see later on parried in Austin Powers and other action movies is where he's making out with the woman and then he can see in the reflection of her eyeballs that somebody is coming up from behind, and I laughed so hard where he sees and then he turns and flips her and the guy clubs her in the back of the head. I laughed so hard, and I don't know if that was intentionally funny or not, but I really thought it was funny. And then kind of the same thing where he then pushes the guy in the bathtub and throws the heater in there, and he's oh, shocking that he died and stuff like that. So stuff like that's really fun. Felix makes his second appearance. He was previously in Dr. No. He was not in From Russia with Love. And Felix is one of those characters where we see him a few times throughout the entire series, but he's very rarely played by the same actor. And it's disheartening for me, it's a little sad, but I mean, it is what it is. We finally meet Goldfinger about 10 minutes into the movie. So like I said, this movie moves very, very fast. All of this has happened in the first 10 minutes. And Goldfinger so far, like I said, is probably my favorite villain, at least in the first three. He's just really entertaining because I love that he's playing Jin, and he's having Jill cheat for him. Cheat for him by reading the cards. So he's just a really interesting character, and we see more of that with the golf and stuff. The thing that threw me off, and some of you might get a little irritated, but that's okay. That's why I'm doing these reviews, is to kind of talk to you guys and see what you think. I am clearly an American. So coming at this from an American point of view, at one point, Bond says it's like listening to the Beatles without earmuffs on. And I don't know, that line just caught me really off guard. It just... because it's a negative thing. He's saying he doesn't like the Beatles. And for British culture, or at least in Europe, I would assume that the Beatles were pretty loved. And I mean, this was 1964, so I thought it was really weird that he said that line. It's like listening to the Beatles without earmuffs. Well, that's, I don't know, that whole line just really kind of took me out of the movie for just an instant, that James Bond evidently doesn't like the Beatles. which is funny because Paul McCartney will sing a song for them later on. But I don't know, for those that are British and watching this, like, what was your reaction to that? Were you like, oh yeah, that makes sense? Or did that kind of catch you off guard as well? Because I'm really curious about like why he thought about that, why he said that. We meet Odd Job for the first time, which again, very cliche character, a character we see parried a whole lot in spy movies. And I loved, this is going to sound wrong, and I'm sorry, but I loved seeing Jill dead on the bed, which kind of rhymed, where she's completely covered in gold. But what I loved about that it's almost a still frame, but that shot is you see her laying there and she's completely naked, but they have the pillow perfectly angled right around her loin area. Because, I mean, she's laying on her breast, so they don't really have to cover that up. But it's perfectly covered, so you don't see anything else. But you can see all of her body, except for where that pillow is. It was perfect placement, and I really liked that shot. I thought it was a fantastic shot. We see M and Miss Moneypenny, played again by Bernard Lee and Lois Maxwell. This is the third time for them, as well as Sean Connery, so that's kind of cool. They're all in it. We see the Q branch for the first time. We saw Desmond Llewellyn played Q in the previous movie, and he plays him again this time. But this time he has more of a not quite an attitude, but he kind of goes back and forth. Like, he has a tit for tat type attitude with Bond, and he like kind of makes fun of him, and that's something we'll see Llewellyn carry out through the rest of the franchise, where it's like, please don't destroy this one, Mr. Bond. And it's kind of fun to watch him carry that throughout the franchise. And he goes through all of the different stuff where, like, the different weapons and stuff, and they introduce the Aston Martin, which I am not a car person whatsoever, but because of James Bond, I know a little bit about, like, the Aston Martin because of this series. And it's kind of fun to watch him like, oh, this is the ejector seat, and this is that, and this is this. And it's just kind of an entertaining thing, which, again, is something that's parried throughout the years. Now, this is where it frustrated me just a little bit. And it's mostly like 1964 storytelling. The whole subplot about Jill's sister, cut that out. Like, that whole, I don't know, what is it, like a half hour, 20 minutes, 15 minutes? Like, that whole scene, you could take that out of the movie and not miss a fucking thing. Like, none of it had anything to do with this movie. It's just a drawn out story, or like a subplot, where you see him like popping the tires, using again with the Aston Martin stuff, and the big chase scene where he's like popping things out through the brake lights and stuff, like the whole thing. And then, I mean, it's an interesting death because it's the only time you actually see Oddjob kill somebody with the hat. But yeah, for the most part, I hated it. Like, that whole subplot, like, did not need to be in there. Like, I was super into it as it was happening. I was like, this is great. Like, I was on the edge of my seat. And then Oddjob kills her, and they capture Bond, and I was like, that's it? Like, you just wasted 20 minutes of my time. Like, what was the point in that? The famous line where he has the laser and it's about to like cut James Bond in half, where he's like, do you expect me to talk? No, I expect you to die. Like, that comes from this movie, so that was kind of cool. And finally, about an hour into it, we finally meet Pussy Galore, who, like, I realized James Bond is kind of known for the suggestive names. I mean, was it Dr. No, or it was Honey Rider? And I was like, that's not too bad. Whereas Pussy Galore is just fantastic. Like, it's a great name. I was doing a little bit of trivia research for this, and supposedly, the rumor is, she introduced herself as Pussy Galore, and he's like, I know you are, but what's your name? And that was too much for, like, the censors and everything, so they changed it to, like, oh, I must be dead, because he was just knocked out. So he's like, oh, I'm in heaven, and here's Pussy Galore. So, I don't know, I thought it was kind of interesting. We see him order a martini that was shaken and not stirred, whereas, like I said, in Dr. No, it was delivered that way. Now, what I liked about Pussy was that she says, like, turn off the charm, I'm immune. And I did some research, and apparently she was actually a lesbian in the books. I've said it before that I have not actually read the books. I own all the books, but I just haven't gotten to them. I'm kind of that cliche nerd where, like, I have this huge library, and I've read about half of it, maybe a quarter of it. So, and it's on my list, and who knows, maybe as I continue these reviews, it will inspire me to actually read them. But evidently she was a lesbian, and they kind of changed that for the movie a little bit. But I liked her being that way. Like, I liked her being immune to his charm. And from here, we're about at the halfway point where this is where it kind of took a lull for me. And then it got more interesting. Like, they go to Baltimore, we see Fort Knox, which I'm a huge Die Hard fan, so I was like, oh, this is where, like, Die Hard 3 came from, was robbing Fort Knox. And for the most part, like, I really like the fight sequences, I like the action, I like the everything about that part of the movie where, like, we see the Pussy Galore's flying circus and they knock everybody out, and we finally get to the bomb. And I liked the scene to be, I mean, I wanted to hate it, but I did like it, where Oddjob, like, goes down and he's fighting with Bond. And Bond throws the hat, which that bothered me, because we've seen Oddjob, like, he took a gold brick to the chest, and he's taking all these beatings, but Bond throws the hat, and so it's not Oddjob that, like, has this weird killer, like, flick of the wrist that can kill people with his magic hat. It's the hat, because if that hat had hit Oddjob, I have zero doubt that it would have killed him. But, so he throws it, and it gets caught in the bars, and then Bond electrocutes him. So, I mean, that was a really great scene as well. I liked the end where, like, the bomb has 007 seconds on it. It's the 007 reference. So that was kind of cool, because I was sitting there and I was like, clearly he's going to deactivate it. And he doesn't. So somebody else comes in and pulls it, just flips the switch, because Bond's like, do I stop this? Do I stop that? Do I pull these wires? And finally somebody else is like, flip, and it's done, and it stops at 007. So that was kind of cool. I was expecting it to be 001, but then I was like, oh, duh, of course it's going to be 007. I liked they before he gets on the plane to go back, he's like, oh, there's liquor for 3 aboard the plane. And he's like, oh, who are the other 2? And he's like, nobody, it's just you. And I was like, that is a man after my own heart. Because, like, especially for liquor. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm down. Especially some vodka martinis. Let's go. So I like that. I like the end sequence with the fight with Goldfinger. Like, overall, I thought this was a great movie. Between the first 3, this is definitely my favorite out of them. So for those who have seen this one, what did you guys think? Was this a favorite but for you? Was this what did you guys think? So we're 3 into Sean Connery, 4 total. And just, I feel like at this point, like I said, they've really hit their stride. So is it something that you think they're doing great? Did you think it was cringeworthy? Go ahead. I feel like most people pretty much like this movie. But I'm curious, what do you guys think? So go ahead, let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for the subscriptions and everything. And then James Bond will return, and we will see you next time for Thunderball.